Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Manley with Manley, Stewart, Finaldi. We represent over 105 women and girls who were molested by Larry Nassar. I wanted to start the press conference. I wanted to start the press conference by thanking the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI for what happened today. On behalf of my clients, we also want to deeply thank Judge Neff, not only for the sentence, because it was just, but for her words. I think the most powerful point in the hearing is when she began to talk about herself as a mom. One of the things that most people don't realize is how devastating this has been for the families and the parents. So often you hear, what about the parents? And what most people don't realize, in competitive gymnastics, the parents are almost excluded. If you're not excluded, you don't compete. But parents feel an unbelievable sense of responsibility when their child is molested. Frequently, they never get over it. So the judge's words about being a mother and imposing the maximum sentence on him, I thought rung true and were in many ways healing. I was very proud of Michaela Maroney and her mom for coming today, and I'm proud of each and every one of these women, who I'll introduce in a moment. I think for every one of them, having to face their perpetrator means overcoming fear, probably an inappropriate fear and an inappropriate perception, but also gives them healing in seeing how the justice system can work. And the truth is, the system failed these women for 20 years. And today, we took a big step in taking back the survivors' power over Dr. Nassar. But there are steps left to take. At the same time we sit here today with Larry Nassar being sentenced, yesterday, our offices were informed, myself, Mr. Drew, Mr. White's office, that USA Gymnastics today intends to file motions to dismiss all of the victims' cases in Washington, USA Gymnastics today intends to file motions to dismiss, in the very court we were just in, to dismiss the civil cases of the victims. Now, USA Gymnastics has every right to file motions, but the decision to file them today and announce that yesterday to us, so we had to contact our clients and let them know this was coming the day before their perpetrator was sentenced. That was particularly cruel. It was unnecessary. And frankly, I find it despicable. Shame on USA Gymnastics for doing that. You didn't need to do it today. We will fight that, but I wanted to make that announcement, and that seems to be indicative of their view of these women and these girls. And that almost seems punitive and hurtful intentionally. Maybe it was gross incompetence. Either way, it's inexcusable. So I wanted to introduce my colleagues, and I'll finish. Jamie White, one of the lawyers representing the 105 victims in the case with me. Stephen Drew from Grand Rapids. Mr. White's from Lansing. I've introduced myself. To my left is Rachel Den Hollander, who many of us feel is largely responsible for us being here today and for Dr. Nassar going to spend the rest of his life in prison. To her left is Sterling Reithman, a former swimmer at MSU and a survivor of Dr. Nassar. To her left is Kayla Lorenz, a former gymnast and a survivor of Dr. Nassar. To her left is Jeanette Antolin. Ms. Antolin is one of the first women from the Team USA to speak out that and admit that she was abused by Dr. Nassar. She appeared on 60 Minutes. She also was on the USA World Championship team. She also is a 3 or 4 time NCAA champion from UCLA, and an incredibly courageous woman. And to her immediate left is Tiffany Thomas. And Ms. Thomas was one of the earliest reporters of Dr. Nassar. She reported this not once but 3 times in the late 90s to Michigan State training personnel. She was dismissed, she was not believed, and I think when Judge Neff referenced this in her statement, she was one of the women who were effectively told, "You're nuts." And she did everything she could to get them to do something, and Michigan State did nothing. If they had listened to that woman to my left, most of the women in that room would not have been there, and he would never have been abused. My final words are to Carrie Perry, the president of USA Gymnastics, Scott Blackman, the president of the U.S. Olympic Committee, and Lou Anna Simon, the president of Michigan State. Where were you today? Did you send a representative? And the simple answer to that is no. Where are the apologies to the victims? The Catholic bishops, when the magnitude of that scandal came out, almost every diocese in the country began to offer free therapy. And Jason Cody, who is their spokesperson, keeps talking about how Michigan State wants to give the victims healing. None of my clients have been offered counseling. None of my clients have been offered a kind word. What they've been offered is a hardball legal strategy under the guise of cheap PR words. It's really a steel fist and a velvet glove. And it's time for that to stop. I saw a press release by a Michigan State senator this morning, and Rachel will talk about that, who told Michigan State, stop thinking about your money and start thinking about healing. Frankly, none of my clients care about money. What they want is the truth to come out and make sure this never happens to anybody else again. And the fact of the matter is that that report has still not been released. The trustees have said nothing, and we don't know who knew what when. And everybody who was involved in covering this up and involved in him staying at Michigan State is still there, save one. That is not right, and it needs to change. I'm now going to turn it over to Ms. Denhollander, who can speak.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. As a victim of Larry Nassar, I have much to be grateful for today. I am grateful for the tireless efforts of investigators and prosecutors who pursued justice. I am grateful for a federal judge that let everyone know that the little girls in those videos were worth every measure of justice that the law can offer. I am grateful for the leadership of State Senator Margaret O'Brien and the other senators who met with us on Tuesday to discuss key legislative reform desperately needed in Michigan to protect sexual assault victims, and who also spoke out today and urged Michigan State to pursue accountability and transparency. But as so much in this process, today the justice feels very incomplete. Because for more than a decade, Larry was not only deeply involved in child pornography, but he was also molesting young girls and women who came to him for medical treatment. For 16 months, I and other victims of Larry have been pleading for answers as to how he could have been left in positions of authority when MSU officials had been warned of his conduct as early as 1997, and when USAG was aware of his flagrant violations of safety policies. And for 16 months, these organizations have deflected. They have told half-truths. They have closed ranks around themselves, and they have refused to acknowledge the dynamics that allowed a pedophile to flourish in their midst. USAG repeatedly refuses to acknowledge that a decades-long policy of not reporting sexual abuse contributed to Larry's ability to prey on their gymnasts for years. They refuse to acknowledge that Steve Penny's under-oath statement that those who report sexual abuse are, quote, witch hunters, contributed to a cultural dynamic that silenced victims. And while they like to point to new policies they will be implementing, thanks to a report identifying 100 pages worth of failures, they refuse to admit that no responsible organization should have to pay a professional investigator to come in and tell them that they need to report the sexual assault of little girls. And MSU has done no better. Officials repeatedly state their belief that no laws were broken, as if committing a crime is the only way that one can enable a sexual predator. This repeated statement that MSU bears no responsibility for what happened to us because they potentially did not commit crimes shows an absolute lack of knowledge regarding what it means to enable a predator. And as a society, this is one of the greatest lessons that we need to take away from what has happened with Larry. Enabling rarely takes the form of someone looking at a perpetrator and saying, sexual abuse of a child is fine, and I'm going to let it continue. That is not what enabling looks like. No, more often than not, enabling looks like deliberate indifference to complaints of sexual assault. It takes the form of authority figures silencing the victims and immediately siding with abusers. It takes the form of mishandling investigations, failing to report, not demanding accountability within their organization. It looks like poor policies, poor oversight, and a failure to enforce protective mechanisms. That is enabling a predator. And MSU and USAG are the poster children. They enabled who is arguably the greatest pedophile in U.S. history for more than 20 years. As early as 1997, young gymnasts were coming forward to MSU head gymnastics coach Kathy Kalagis and reported being penetrated and, quote, fingered like a boyfriend by him. The young girls who were brave enough to speak up were threatened with, quote, consequences for them and for Larry if Kathy and they signed the complaint that could be filed. They were assured it was common medical treatment, and then they were sent back to their abuser for continued molestation. In 1999 and 2000, 2 more athletes spoke up, one of them being Tiffany, and told athletic trainers and supervisors what Larry was doing to them, and they received the same answer, and they were pressured to go back to their abuser for more abuse. In 2004, a victim reported to the Meridian Township Police Department, and Larry was brought into the police department to explain away his molestation as medical treatment. In 2014, yet another victim filed a police complaint to MSU PD and to the Title IX office. She told investigators that Larry had massaged her vagina like a boyfriend would and had groped her breast. Larry was allowed to handpick the MSU colleagues as the experts who would assure investigators that there was nothing wrong with Larry's medical treatment. The victim was ultimately told in a written report she, quote, didn't understand the nuanced difference between sexual assault and a medical exam. Numerous other Title IX violations were also found and alleged during this investigation. And when I came forward 2 years later and filed my police report, and I included significant documentation evidencing my claims, Dean William Strample, who was also involved in clearing Larry in 2014, sent an email to Larry immediately and told him, quote, good luck, I am on your side. He then forwarded my video testimony around to the office and to the MSU provost, and he mocked me, saying my testimony was the cherry on the cake of his day. I waited 5 months after filing my police report before making the decision to join the civil lawsuit. I had no intention of filing a civil lawsuit. I was waiting to see how MSU and USAG would respond, and their response has been heartbreaking because it has reminded me time and time again that our voices do not matter. MSU has claimed they wanted to get to the bottom of what happened, but they waited more than 6 months to begin contacting any former athletes at MSU or former patients of Larry to give them a place to report suspected abuse. MSU claimed they would hold individuals accountable, but they refused to release the report showing who at MSU was aware of these allegations and when. MSU spokesperson Jason Cody has responded to our request to release this document by saying MSU never intended to produce a public report, as if the fact that they never intended to be accountable and transparent excuses the fact that they are not being accountable and transparent. MSU claimed they would, and they touted a recent report on their current Title IX compliance, as if that erases the previous report by federal investigators, evidencing multiple Title IX violations up through 2015. During the same time frame, Larry was being investigated and cleared of previous complaints of sexual assault. And MSU also maintains, despite this federal investigation report showing these violations, that they did nothing wrong in their Title IX investigation. And MSU has claimed that they acknowledge the damage of sexual assault and that they respect the victims' voices. But the truth is that MSU trustees and other high-ranking officials have characterized all of us as ambulance chasers who are looking for a payday, as being in it for the money. What does that really mean? It means that all of us sitting up here today are lying about our motivation for coming forward. It means that we don't really care about all the little girls that come after us. It means that our words and our actions and our character have come under attack by the very people we appeal to for help and protection. One of the things that makes America great is our justice system and the access to justice that victims have. And yet when we participated in that justice process, MSU used it as a means to attack us, to attack our character, and to attack our motivations. And perhaps most tellingly, MSU officials are saying the exact same thing about sexual assault victims that Larry's defense attorneys said about me and said about these other women. As if our damage wasn't real. As if the desperate need for change at these organizations wasn't real. As if we didn't really care about protecting the little girls that will be walking on that campus and into gymnastics facilities across the country. And when people in authority at MSU begin aligning themselves with the same victim and attacking that is employed by a pedophile's defense attorney, that should tell us everything we need to know about what side they have chosen. It is victim blaming and victim shaming at its finest. And that should terrify us. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is the culture of abuse. This is what keeps victims silent. This is what keeps predators in power. And this is what is endangering our next generation of little girls. And contrary to what MSU officials are saying, that's the reason that we are here. Thank you.
Sterling? Could you put the mic in front of you?
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sterling Reithman, and like so many women here today, I am facing my truth as a survivor of Larry Nassar. We have come a long way over the course of this past year, and today marks another day of progress. With a case this intricate, it can be easy to lose sight of the bigger issues at hand. I encourage everyone to acknowledge the great step forward that was taken today by the sentencing of Larry Nassar to 60 years in prison. There are countless athletes that are now protected from his malicious actions in years to come, and that is not something to be taken for granted or considered lightly. Because of Judge Neff's actions today, little girls won't have to look at themselves in the mirror and beg themselves to stop shaking. When every bone and every organ and every fiber of your being is disgusted and terrified of what has happened to you, all they can do is tremble and shake and try to escape, and he will spend his life behind bars. However, while today certainly marks a notable date in the pursuit of our justice, we must not forget the progress we have left to make when it comes to claiming justice and protection for victims and repercussions for abusers and enablers. It's important to understand that our purpose here is simple. We seek the truth, we seek justice, and we seek change. To put it simply, we have to raise the bar as a society. We can no longer accept sexual abuse as the norm, and we have to set the expectation that we can do better and we will do better. We have to be a culture that does not tolerate abuse, nor the people who enable abusers, regardless of circumstance. It's time to demand the change needed to put a stop to the vicious cycle of abuse that is all too rampant in our world today. And while I'm hopeful that one day this level of accountability will be the norm, we unfortunately are just not there. Instead, MSU, USAG, and the USOC are turning a blind eye and severing the many ties they were once so proud of in a thinly veiled attempt to claim innocence. I am continuously discouraged by MSU's response, or lack thereof, to the damage their negligence has caused, not only to us, but our families, our friends, and our loved ones. MSU's attitude toward us as women coming forward is both alarming and degrading. and their refusal to acknowledge our abuse under their watchful eye is yet another harsh reminder how irresponsibly sexual assault is handled on MSU's campus. The disrespect shown towards us as victims is a clear example of how Larry was able to stay in his position of authority at MSU for as long as he did, and it must be put to an end. The leadership at MSU must be held accountable for their blatant disregard for the health and well-being of individuals in their care. As we continue in this process, I'm incredibly thankful for the group of state senators willing to not only listen to our concerns about how Michigan law treats victims and abusers, but for those willing to support positive change. Michigan ranks as one of the least supportive states for victims and most protective states for abusers in our country. The laws set in place make the legal process near impossible for victims to find the justice we deserve, a harsh realization that is damaging on so many levels. We appreciate the leadership shown by Senator O'Brien and her colleagues in recognizing that the legislature must change and in showing their support. Transparency and accountability will no longer be requested, but instead demanded by the leadership of our state, and that gives me great hope. I would love nothing more than for the Michigan legislature to transition from one of the worst in the country to a leader in how this country handles sexual abuse. I look around the room at those that have come forward as victims, and I'm still in disbelief that we are all facing this grave reality. Our experience with Larry Nassar is a part of each of our stories now. As much as we'd love to erase this painful part of our pasts, we have to face the facts and face the uncomfortable reality of where we sit today. Each of us may be processing our experience differently, but we are all processing in our own right. I am grateful for the strength and fortitude of all the women walking this treacherous path together. It is unknown and harsh and difficult to say the least, but in spite of that, I say again, we seek the truth, we seek justice, and we seek change. If not for us, then for the generations of children to come, all just trying to chase their dream. As a society, we have the opportunity to do better. I'm hopeful and encouraged that we can do better and that we are ready to create the positive change that is so badly needed. We have the opportunity to protect the generations of tomorrow from walking the same path that we are. And while I certainly can't speak for all, I can say this: we will not rest until we do. Thank you.
Kaylee, I'm going to ask Steve to go, and then we'll shift. Steve?
Hi, I'm Stephen Drew, co-counsel with Mr. Manley on these, and we represent a number of the victims, obviously. Judge Neff today talked about the effect when you're a young child that abuse has on you with somebody you trust. So today was a big step in that sense regarding that violation. The first violation that occurs is when the sexual abuse is done by a man that you trust and put the utmost faith in. But it doesn't stop there. A second violation occurs when you find out that the institutions and the entities and the businesses that you put your trust in, that our clients and their parents put the trust in, the USAG, Michigan State University, even the U.S. Olympic Committee. You bring your children to these and you expect that they're going to protect your children. And so then when you later find out that these persons and these institutions failed you and enabled the predator to have access to your children and maybe even put profits and prestige and money ahead of protecting the children that you are using to achieve that only have the goals of being the best that they can be. That hurts, and it increases the damage to them. And then you have the third violation, and that is when those same enablers refuse to take full responsibility and accountability, and they give hollow words and lack of action and no transparency. When we have our children and they do something wrong, what do we tell them? You first have to admit that you did something wrong. Then you have to help repair the damage and understand and do everything you can to take the high road. And so when that isn't done, it hurts. It's another violation. It's another smack in the face to these ladies and these young women and these girls that were violated. So we hope that this lawsuit can effectuate some change, but someday have the responsibility and the acceptance of the responsibility. Thank you.
Kayla?
Excuse me. I have not prepared anything today, and I am open to any questions that you all may have. But there is one thing that I do want to say, and that is that MSU does need to take responsibility and own up to what they have been hiding. And they want to say the truth, and the truth they say is so important to them. But if it is so important, why aren't you telling us all the truth? Why is it so hard for you to help all of us victims in being able to know that truth? And that is something that needs to happen sooner than later. And today was definitely a step in the right direction, and such a good day to see that Larry Nassar will be in prison for the rest of his life, and that is exactly what he deserves. And once again, I'm open to any questions you have. Thank you.
Okay. Jeanette, please.
I haven't prepared anything either, but I do want to say that there was closure for me, and I know as well with everybody else today, seeing Larry Nassar go behind bars for the rest of his life. But like everyone else said, it's a step in the right direction, but we're still not finished. There are a lot of other things that have to happen in order for not just Larry to get his accountability, but USA Gymnastics, MSU, the USOC, they need to stand up and do what's right, and they just haven't up until this point. So now it is once again our mission to get that done, and I know none of us are going to stop until that happens. So they can run and hide it as long as they want, but eventually the truth will come out, just like Larry. The truth always comes out, and it would be nice to see someone take accountability for something because for so many years we've been fighting for, you know, someone to listen to us. I know anyone that has children would want someone to listen to their son or daughter when something horrible had been done to them. And that's, I know for all of us, our parents are asking the same thing. You know, they're not allowed to be here, but they have regret and sorrow just putting us in those situations that they knew nothing about. They thought that they were doing the best thing for us, giving us the best opportunities, and then we were getting harmed by one of the best doctors that we knew in the country. So there just needs to be more justice done. And I just want to say that we will do everything that we can until that justice is had. Thank you.
Jamie White. James White.
I want to echo all of the comments made by the lawyers here today and the brave young woman that sit here today. For the sake of not being repetitive, I will just say I join in their comments. There are a couple of things that I do want to add or at least elaborate on. Ms. Den Hollander spoke very eloquently about the inadequacies of Michigan law as it pertains to protecting victims, young minor victims of sexual assault. A lot of things have shocked me over the course of the last year associated with this case. But I'll tell you, as we began to research the statutes as it applies to the protection of minors who have been assaulted, whether by institutions or individuals or whoever for that matter, I was shocked to see how barbaric the laws are in the state of Michigan when compared with the other 50 states and territories where Michigan law, in fact, is applied to these sorts of situations. So I commend Ms. Den Hollander and her leadership in reaching out to the state legislature to hopefully make change, to make sure that our state, as she indicated, is a leader and not an embarrassment as it pertains to this particular issue. The other thing that I guess I would like to address is I watched Mr. Cody or read Mr. Cody's comments, and other leaders from the Michigan State community comment on and off the record, there seems to be this this effort to suggest that, well, whatever did happen has certainly been fixed to date. And I guess I would just like to share with you folks one incident that involves a victim, Lindsay Lemke, who has made herself public very early on in this. She was she was part of USGA for several years. We have a hard time calculating how many times she was assaulted. She was a neighbor of Dr. Nassar. She was assaulted in his home. She was assaulted at Twist Arts Gym, and she was assaulted at Michigan State University's facilities. Just based on the number of times she saw him over the course of years, we estimate that she was assaulted somewhere around 600 times. So when John talks about, hey, and Rachel talked about, hey, look, the reaction here was not to sue anybody initially. Most of the people, if not all of the people involved in this lawsuit, felt that this was a last resort. And let me share Ms. Lemke's story with you into how she came to this lawsuit. She was a member of Michigan State's gymnastics team, and when the stories came out about Larry, Coach Klages' first inclination was to pass out a card amongst all of the girls on the gymnastics team to sign, to show him how much support they have for him. So think about this young woman in late 2016, early 2017, who was trying to deal with what in her mind is still trying to figure out, was all of this he was doing to me for all of these years an assault? Was it real? You know, she didn't know, but she had been forced to sign a card by a head coach for a Division I college, one of the largest educational institutions in our country. That was the culture, even after the allegations came out of the Indy Star at Michigan State University. We'll take it a couple of steps further. Ms. Lemke eventually told her parents what had happened to her. They were outraged. They didn't run to see a lawyer. They went to see Coach Klages. They wanted answers. They wanted reassurances. They wanted some information. What did Coach Klages tell Ms. Lemke's mother? She told her that she didn't believe any of the allegations. And Ms. Lemke said, well, what about the child pornography that they found in his garbage? And Coach Klages responded, it must have been planted. That was the culture. That was the mindset after 2014, after the Indy Star story. So this idea that's being perpetuated by administration, officials, legal counsel, and so on, that whatever happened at Michigan State was isolated, and it certainly has been dealt with since then through these various press releases that we continue to see. It certainly was not, there was nothing different in Coach Klages' mind, even after the accusations come forward. And we know now that he did in fact assault all these girls, and we certainly know now that nobody planted 37,000 images of child pornography in his garbage. So again, I want to echo the comments of Mr. Manley and just my sincere appreciation to the U.S. Attorney and the State Attorney General for all of their efforts in this matter, and most importantly, the detectives and federal agents who worked tirelessly to bring this to the beginning of a conclusion. Thank you.
Tiffany Thomas.
I did not, and I was not able to thank the press just over a year ago for allowing me to share my story. So thank you guys all for taking the time out to share what we've gone through and what we will continue to go through and what we will continue to fight for. I did not prepare anything formal, and I'm open to questions as well. I would just like to say that I initially contacted Mr. Manley in his office to once again tell my story like I did initially back in '99. I just wanted to tell someone. And I wasn't seeking anything monetarily, and I still am not. What I was seeking was validation. And I feel like I got that in a sense when Dr. Nassar finally admitted to abusing all of us. And so there is a sense of relief within myself that I got exactly what I was asking for. And now I feel I'm still on the search for my alma mater to take responsibility. Two of the young ladies that were on staff at the time that I reached out to are still on staff at the school, and we've heard nothing from either one or anyone. So I just want them to say something. Yes, we understand, we're sorry, just something. And I'm just hopeful that something will be stated soon.
All right, we are now open to questions from anyone who cares to ask of anybody on the panel.
For those of you that were in court, what did you think about what Larry had to say? He said he's praying for you guys. He said he's also sorry. Do you believe that he's actually sorry? And what do you think about him saying he's praying for you?
I think Larry is a consummate narcissist. I think he is a master manipulator. I think he does not want to acknowledge, as his family does not, the depth of who he is. And that is what I see reflected in his statement.
Do you find that offensive?
You know, to be perfectly honest, I gave up on Larry a long time ago. I don't think a whole lot about him anymore. You know, the wounds from the abuse are still there. It is something I still live with and deal with and have to process every day. But I don't need the answers from Larry anymore. I know what the truth is. I know what he did. And I can hold on to that reality regardless of what he says.
So MSU hasn't reached out to any of you guys?
No.
Not to be personal?
No, I waited 5 months.
I would also point out to that end, you know, Mr. Fitzgerald has talked about his thorough investigation. We've seen the trustees talked about his thorough investigation. How many of you have spoken to Patrick Fitzgerald? Yeah. He hasn't spoken to any of our clients, not a single one. So if you want to find out what happened, don't you ask to speak to the victims? That investigation, you know, by the lawyer that's defending the lawsuits was pure cover. And the chickens have come home to roost. And now they're between a rock and a hard place because they told people, oh, we did an investigation, everything's fine. And now Mr. Schuette wants it, and apparently the legislature wants it. It'll be interesting to see what happens. The letter that was sent by Ms. Simon today doesn't say that it's going to give it to him. It says Mr. Fitzgerald will be in touch. Produce the report, President Simon, or resign. I said it last time, I'll say it again. Produce the report publicly or resign. It's a public institution. These women deserve the truth, and you're hiding it. Produce the report.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to note, you know, Penn State commissioned a very similar report, and they waived attorney-client privilege so that they could release it to the victims. MSU scandal is on a far greater scope, not to minimize in any way, shape, or form what happened at Penn State. But MSU scandal is you know, multiple times the size of Penn State scandal. And Penn State was initially the poster child for how not to handle sexual abuse complaints. MSU has eclipsed them by a long shot. And I find that heartbreaking because we should know better. We should know better in 2017, and we don't.
Obviously, this is a civil suit. Do you think this could become criminal?
You know, that's not for me to say. I do think that, you know, with USAG, with the USOC, and with Michigan State, they all had mandatory reporters that were in the mix who were supposed to report. None of them did. Michigan State never reported outside of Michigan State. They never called Child Protective Services, yet they knew he was treating all these children. USA Gymnastics at the Caroli Ranch knew in June of 2015 that he had molested 3 gymnasts, including Michaela Maroney. She reported it. They still didn't call the police. The USOCs never said it when they knew. And it'd be very interesting to find out when they admit they knew. When was the USOC told that Larry Nassar had molested 2 or 3 of the most famous Olympians in the world? Did they hide that truth? I think parents, you know, we represent a number of children who were molested after 2014, some hundreds of times. they were never given the heads up that Dr. Nassar had been given new protocols, that no one was to be alone. He was never to be alone with a woman or a child, that he was supposed to use a glove. They were never told that. As far as we know, much of the staff wasn't told that. You know, those parents and those children deserve answers. How is it that he could have savaged dozens of children after MSU was well aware he was doing it? How is that possible? How is it possible that USA Gymnastics, when they knew in 2015, when they fired him for molesting Olympic gymnasts, they told the gymnasts to be quiet, they told their families to be quiet, and they never picked up the phone and called the Michigan State Police? Why didn't the USOC pick up the phone and call the police? USOC has an office. They have a chief security officer whose sole job is to protect the athletes. He never picked up the phone and called the Michigan State Police. Both of them in that time frame have tremendous things to answer for. And I think there should be a criminal investigation. I think there should be investigation all the way back, not for two reasons. One, were crimes committed, but two, who is responsible? This is a government entity funded by the taxpayers. How could they mess this up so badly? How could they allow this many girls to be hurt? Those are questions that are fair. Those are questions that the legislature should ask. Those are questions the United States Congress should ask. The Congress has oversight over the U.S. Olympic Committee. It created it.
Same question to the survivors. Do you think someone should be held criminally responsible or at least accountable beyond just transparency?
You know, I think that is absolutely what should be happening, whether or not Michigan law is going to support that, because again, we are one of the worst states, if not the worst state in the country for supporting sexual assault survivors and protecting our children, which is why I think it is extremely important to understand that just because a law wasn't broken or just because something isn't prosecutable does not mean that there was not a direct enabling of a sexual predator. You know, and again, what enabling looks like and how that can be done rarely results in criminal prosecution for failure to report, because we simply don't have good laws on mandatory reporting. That is one of the things that Senator O'Brien is reviewing, is our mandatory reporting laws. And so we hope to have those strengthened. But it goes far beyond whether or not a law is broken.
Yeah, I would.
One of the things that Mr. Nassar said in court today was that he's lost everything in this process. And I guess I'd be curious what each of you feel like he's lost with his actions.
Let's just start the other end. Yeah. Tiffany, why don't you start?
A sense of self. I was told on multiple occasions that I was crazy and I was making this up, and I have continued to go through my life and into my adult life and now being a mom, and I second guess myself a lot. I feel inadequate at times in making the most simplest decisions or just communicating in general. It's affected me a lot, and I'm taking the necessary steps to heal, but this will forever have an impact on me.
Jeanette?
It was almost laughable to me when he made that comment in court, because he's speaking for just himself. And to think of the scale of how many lives he has affected, and it's not just in that moment of what he was doing, but it's years of damage that he's done to each and every one of us. So you calculate all of those years, and it's hundreds and thousands of years of, you know, damage that he's done. And for me, I didn't realize that it was abuse, because, like Rachel said, he's a master manipulator. And I just realized last year, and putting two and two together with the events of my life, just realizing how much what he did to me as a kid has affected me as an adult, is frustrating. And it was like an aha moment when I found out, because it's like looking at the pattern of my life and things that have happened, it has really shown me how it has affected me in my adulthood. And it's just sad, because my life could have been so much different. But because of the things that he had done to me as a kid, it's affected me until now, you know, and we'll continue to. But like we said, we're all going through the healing process, and it will get better, and seeing him go behind bars for the rest of his life is a stepping stone to that. But yeah, I don't think people understand how much it does affect the victims' lives. And it's all of us, you know, and to think of the number of people that he's just affected, and to hear him say it's affected his life. You know, he's lost everything. Well, we've lost a lot too, you know, and it wasn't our choice. It was his choice. So, yeah, that's it.
Is there any way to estimate how many times he's abused these women total?
Well, I can tell you that in his first interview with the police, with Andrea Mumford with the Michigan State Police, he said he'd done this to thousands of women. His words, not mine. I can tell you the range in our clients ranges from once to 600 plus times. So the answer is, you know, it's in the thousands, in the thousands, in the thousands. And none of this needed to happen. And that's really the tragedy of it. If anybody, numerous people were told, and if any of them had had the courage to just stand up and say, no, you're not going to do this anymore. If Dr. Strample had called any of these patients, these little girls, and said, I need to talk to you, we need to do a sample interview, we need to find out what happened. If somebody had just asked the parents, did anything happen to your child that's unusual in the treatment room? Any of these things, it could have been stopped. But they didn't do it. And the reason they didn't do it is they either knew, or even worse, they didn't want to know. And that is unbelievable. Did you want to say something about how it's affected you, Kaylee?
I can say that trust is, I've lost so much trust. I can't even go to the doctor anymore by myself without sitting on a patient table and being like, it just replays over and over in my head. And I just get so scared to go to the doctor because that's the first thing that pops into my head. And it's just hard to trust anybody, especially anybody new that comes into my life anymore. Because who knows if they'll betray you too in the same way.
Sterling?
Yeah, I think echoing what Kaylee said, it's definitely difficult to trust doctors, medical professionals. But I think the thing that's been most startling for me is how much it's affected the trust of myself. It makes you question if you know the difference between right and wrong. It makes you question your judgment skills. It makes you question things that you should never have to question. So I think that's one of the things that is most alarming because, as you said, it was his choice. It was not ours.
Tiffany, what do you want to say to the trainers that are still at MSU that silenced you?
This is really hard for me only because it just became really personal with one of the young ladies in particular who took very good care of me and my teammates. Sweet young woman, very caring, very thoughtful. When I went to her initially, she was very compassionate about what she was willing to do and take it to her superior. I feel like I want her to be my saving grace. I feel like she has the power to say she came to me and she said something and we did nothing to help her. I have hopes for that. I don't know if that's possible, but it would do so much. It would relieve so much. It would help me to just feel at ease if you would just admit what you know. Admit that I came to you, I said something to you, I spoke out to you. Just tell your side of the story. It's as simple as that.
I'm curious, at some point Larry made some comments during his statement. He talked about the need for education. Could one of you probably talk about when he was, because I saw a few of you looking around at each other and you looked kind of perplexed when he was.
How about educating your staff and things of that nature, that when you have sexual complaints, that someone is doing something to a child, you take their computer. Everybody heard today what terrible graphic things were on this man's computer, and the report said it had been on there from 2003 to 2016. In 2014, if they hadn't been so indifferent to him and just taken his computer then, all of those even after that. To make a comment that was made that it's impossible to identify a predator in our midst or a pedophile in our midst, and that's what President Simon said. No, it is possible. You know what that statement says? That says if I'm a pedophile, maybe this isn't a bad place to be, because they're not going to give the education of what the red flags are. They're not going to educate their staff as to what to look for. They're not going to say, if someone comes to you and says the man is putting his hands in my vagina, that that's a sexual assault in 1999 and it needs to be reported up and stopped. That's what education does. That's how you stop it. Those are the red flags. It's been known for years that pedophiles try to find their prey. They try to find their prey. Young boys, Boy Scouts, they try to find their prey. And if you're allowed to prey, then that's where they will stay. And if you're not, they will leave and try to go somewhere else. Education is very important.
There was also a comment made by the judge that some of the videos even included his own children.
I don't. The only word for what he did and what he looked at is profound evil. And every woman, every man should have the right to choose when and if they want to become sexual. And that was stolen from every one of those women. The fact that he would do this to his own children shows his depravity and his vileness, and frankly, his evil nature. I thought one of the most offensive things he said is he used the words alcoholism in the same context as his pedophilia, as if the two are somehow equivocated. That was particularly disgusting, and I don't think he did himself any favors. Does anybody want to add anything on that?
Yeah, that was very shocking. When we were sitting, Jeanette and I were sitting next to each other, holding hands, because like I said, this is extremely tough for all of us. And as soon as he stated that it's almost like a drug addict or an alcoholic, we gasped. Yeah. Like, we couldn't even believe that he could equate that with this. Like, it's just mind-boggling.
Other questions?
For each of you, what specifically do you want to see happen, whether it's with MSU, with USAG, or the committee? What specifically do you want to see in order to feel like there's some additional justice for you?
Rachel?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I'm a mom, and I expect out of a board of grown individuals the same thing I expect out of my 2-year-old. When my 2-year-old does something that damages one of her siblings, I expect her to go to that person and to say with specificity what she did, to acknowledge the damage that what she did caused, and then to take some kind of concrete action to repair that damage. And that is what we have not seen at MSU. There has been no recognition of what they did that allowed this to happen to all of us. There has been no real recognition of the damage, because as many times as they put out press statements saying we understand the impact of assault, they're also saying these women are money chasers who are in it for a payday. And they have taken no steps to repair the damage. And I don't think it's too much to expect a board of grown individuals who are in charge of children and young women to take the same steps that I expect out of my 2-year-old.
Back if there's pending litigation, do you buy that as a shield to not comment any further?
Absolutely not. I waited 5 months, and I waited 5 months specifically because my desire was to be able to sit down with MSU and to talk it out. And to, you know, my greatest hope was that they would come to me and say, what did we miss and how can we change it? That's what I wanted to have happen. And I waited 5 months. I had a lot of people ask me in the beginning, do you plan on joining the civil suit? And I told them all no. I had never looked at the legalities. I had never examined it. I had never prepped for it. I put a ton of effort into my police report. I never even considered the idea of a civil suit until it became patently obvious that MSU and USAG were not going to change, not going to acknowledge what had happened, and therefore cannot make the changes needed to keep children safe. They had an opportunity to come to us. They had an opportunity to come to most of us beforehand, and they chose not to do it.
Allie, just to add to that, you know, it's time for the Michigan State University community to step up and be heard. We know privately that there's a lot of outrage. We know through social media there's a lot of outrage. At this point in time, there's 550,000 living alumni from Michigan State University, and it's time for them to become a part of the solution. Clearly, the leadership of the university as of today is unwilling to do their job. So it's time for the students, the donors, the professors, you know, people that are part of Spartan community. It's time for them to stand up, because I think without their assistance, Michigan State's reputation is going to continue to sour.
I have a question for the survivors. It just strikes me as I watch you out there that you're part of this sisterhood that you never wanted to be part of. And many of you have had, through court appearances, an opportunity to be around other survivors, but some of you haven't. So what is it like for you? And I'll take it from anybody who wants to answer it. What is it like for you to all, you know, look to your left and right and see someone who had the exact same experience? What is that like?
I know for me, when everything started happening last year, just to be around the girls, it's almost like someone finally understands me and understands what I'm going through, because nobody did. You know, I know for me, me and Jamie had similar stories, Jamie Dancher, and just being able to talk to her about what I was going through. She was going through the same things, and just to feel like I'm not alone, because for so long I did feel like I was all alone. And I just find strength when I'm around these women. It just makes me feel like a stronger person, and you know, that we're standing up against this huge giant, because going up against MSU, USA Gymnastics, the USOC, you know, it's not easy, and for so long we never felt like we were heard, you know, and most of us were silenced. So to actually feel like we are now making a difference, it makes me feel proud, because I know that there weren't adults looking out for me when I was a kid. So I'm proud to be an adult that's looking out for the generations after me.
Since I was 13 when this all happened to me, it was always in the back of my mind, you know, was this really a real medical procedure? Like, we have all questioned throughout this whole thing. And I was never able to go to anybody and say, hey, you know, like, is this really real? And now that I have that, not that obviously it's the ideal situation, but being able to go to any of these women, or not even sitting here, but any of them, just to be able to talk and be able to relate is very helpful in this situation.
I was just telling Rachel after the court session ended that this is I was begging to meet her, because I felt like without her there would be no me sitting here. So the sisterhood, and meeting Sterling and you, Kayla, and Jeanette and I have met before, but the sisterhood bond is real, and not just with the women sitting here, but with all of us. If we've met or if we haven't met, the bond is real. We all have something in common now. We all share something. We all will continue to hold each other up because of what we are going through and what we'll continue to go through. But I appreciate you guys. I really do.
Other questions? Okay. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. We really do appreciate it. And This is a very important day, and I'm sure that the individual survivors will be able for individual interviews if you'd like to talk to them. Thank you.